Okay, we'll get underway. So, welcome. My name is Bruce Miller. I'm with RimTech Consulting, and today we're here to talk about how to deploy an EDRMS. So we won't be getting into the nitty-gritty of all the technical details, but I do have lots and lots of YouTube videos with those nitty-gritty details. So today it's very high level. What does it really take to pull off such a project? And the beautiful thing about this session is that it's vendor neutral in that there are 5 products that you could use to bring records compliance to SharePoint. They are Microsoft Purview, Opus by AvePoint, RecordPoint, Gimmal by Mayo, and Collabware. So it doesn't matter which of those products that you use. Everything you hear today is equally applicable to any of those 5. And I would invite you to, at any time, open your mic and ask a question. And don't feel free to wait till the end. Feel free to jump in anytime. And tomorrow, I will send all registrants an email with a downloadable link for the recording. So before we get underway, there is no hope for you to truly understand what I'm talking about until you understand 4 fundamental things first. Number 1 is, where does compliance really come from in an EDRMS? Number 2 is, what's up with the retention schedule? Well, we're going to have to talk about that. And number 3 is SharePoint Information Architecture. That's what SharePoint IA stands for. You're going to have to understand what a SharePoint IA would look like for a typical EDRMS. And finally, what the heck are content rules? This is one that bugs me a lot. This is something that too few records and IT professionals understand about an EDRMS. So we're definitely going to cover that one and in some detail. Only then will you understand what are the steps to deploy a project. So first of all, what do we mean by compliance? Well, my definition says that every document in SharePoint adheres to or complies with an appropriate retention schedule rule in the retention schedule. And that means that all documents in SharePoint are being managed as a record. Notice what I never said. I never said they are records. I said they're being managed as records because I don't care if they're records or not. We're going to have to manage them as records. And that means 3 things. Number 1 is they're immutable, which means the metadata and the content cannot be changed by anyone. Number 2 is a proper, appropriate retention rule has been assigned to that document or record from the retention schedule. Number 3 is that typically 60% or more of all records are case records or event-based triggers. And that means that in order for the software to properly process those records, they have to have all the event dates in hand so they can apply them. So without proper treatment of 60% of those records that are event-based, this disposition will be a failure. So at the end of this, it all means that there's a way to tell if your system is compliant. If it's compliant, you can pull off a disposition 2, 3, 4 years out. What is a disposition? It's the process of destroying records en masse based on their retention treatments in the retention schedule. And in order to pull off that miracle, you need a classification accuracy rate of over 85%. And any good EDRMS project measures that rate every single day, records it, so that 3, 4, 5 years out, when you do pull the trigger and dispose of millions of records, you can do it with complete confidence. Okay? So that's one concept. Now, here's the first of the 4 things I said you need to truly understand. Where does compliance come from? Well, if we have, let's say, 1,000 users, it turns out that on average, 1,000 users will create 12 records a day. Where do we get that number 12? 50 inbound emails, 20% of which would be meet the definition of a record. 2 non-emails, i.e. documents per day, created or downloaded, total of 12. So that would be 12,000 a day or 2.7 million per year. That's a big records flow. So if you as a records person thinks that you're ever going to see, touch, engage with, or have anything to do with digital records in the future, you're mistaken. It's not going to happen. If you were to just check 1,000, just check the records from 1 day's worth of records flow, you'd need 25 person days without taking a break. 25 person days. So that means forget about it. You will never see a record again in a typical EDRMS project. So what would happen if we were to take one document and show it to 10 users at random and ask them two questions? Is this a record? Number two, where does it belong in the retention schedule? You're going to get up to 10 different answers. And if you ask the same people the same question with the same document a month or two later, you're going to get a different set of answers. So what's the conclusion here? Well, the conclusion is that you have to make a tough decision right here, right now, which is where does compliance truly come from? Does it come from the users or does it come from the organization and get imposed on users? This school of thought says, well, of course, compliance comes from end users. They have an inherent responsibility to manage their documents as records. Right. That also means that they get to choose what retention rule and why. Second school of thought says, are you out of your mind? That's never going to work. We need to guarantee that the right retention rules are assigned 85% of the time or higher. That's just not going to happen if we leave it up to the users. So we therefore have to impose compliance on end users. If they don't like the retention rule, tough, that is the rule. Which of these two schools of thought is correct? Well, the answer is the school of thought that says we impose record keeping on the user. It doesn't work the other way around. It has not worked in history, not in my lifetime, and I don't think it'll ever work in the future. And no, there's no free ticket from IA here, okay? I know what you're thinking. Forget about it. So this school of thought says we need to impose record keeping. That's the way to go, okay? So what does this mean? Well, if that's true, then it means that we have 12,000 records a day, but no records intervention is is possible. It's impossible. And we can't rely on the users to do this, so that only leads to one conclusion. We have to automate it. And automation does not mean AI. Automation means we're going to use the software for its intended purpose to deliver us a guarantee of 85% classification or higher. So, so we're now on the automation path, okay? So these are two hard realities that are going to creep in any EDRMS project. Number one, the retention schedule will never be seen or read or acted upon by users. Yeah, so no one will ever see the retention schedule again. Number two, you will never touch digital records, ever. So those are two hard and actually good realities about a modern EDRMS. So the consequences of that is that full automation. We have to have no user involvement in records classification or declaration. And you, the records manager, will not be able to fix a problem if it occurs, or even for that matter, touch or see digital records. Not at scale, that's for sure. So the system has to be constructed to guarantee the classification accuracy rate. And that's exactly what a modern EDRMS does. So let's start out with the retention schedule. Well, turns out that you're going to have to break it. Whatever retention schedule you have now, you're going to have to change it. You're going to have to convert it to a software-ready retention schedule. That's necessary for the record-keeping software to act upon it because humans are not acting upon it. The software is acting upon it. So these are 5 characteristics of a typical software-ready retention schedule. But make no mistake about it, you have to do that before you can build an EDRMS. This is an example of a good old-fashioned retention schedule. This is what it looks like in a modern software-ready form. Completely different. It's a spreadsheet. It has a whole bunch of new characteristics. We're not going to get into it today. I have a full YouTube video, several of them actually, on how to build a software-ready retention schedule. Highly recommend you view it. But either way, you've got to take a hammer to that retention schedule, smash it to bits, and rebuild it in the proper form. Otherwise, there's nothing the software can do for you. Next up is the SharePoint Information Architecture, the IA. What the heck is that? Well, that means where do we store our documents in SharePoint? What libraries, what sites, what metadata, and what permissions do we need for this whole thing to work? That's what IA generally means. Now, the approach we take, and the approach that I believe works, is one to one to one. One category in the retention schedule equals one library or location to store records in SharePoint. And in that library is one content type, which is a batch of metadata suitable for the contents of that library. So on the right here are two examples. Now remember, 60% of all records are case records. That means case records, and I highly recommend you view yet another YouTube video on case records. I call it the Achilles heel of modern record keeping and the Achilles heel of modern records managers. This is a huge systemic problem in the industry at large, okay? So I won't be explaining what case records are, but I will show you this, is that we have an administrative category, i.e. not a case category, and the name of it is safety. So the library in SharePoint will be called safety, and the content type within that library will be called safety. Very simple. But we have a case category called contracts, where every contract is a case. The records for each case have to be separated from each other. So the library will be called contracts, the content type is contracts, but this library is subdivided into containers. Each container within that library designates a case, a set of related records with its own unique event end date, okay? So at the end of the day, this is what it looks like. You're baking a three-layer cake. The retention schedule is at the bottom. Here's an example. For 1,000 users, a good, healthy EDRMS would have about, I would say, 800 categories in it. So there will be 800 categories in the retention schedule. 60% or 480 will be case categories where the retention rule is applied to the case as a whole, not to individual documents. The 320 remaining will have retention rules assigned to individual documents. There is no concept of cases, okay? Let's go up a level to SharePoint. This is a true IA. Now we have 800 libraries, 480 on the right, which are divided into containers, one for each case. And on the left, 320 libraries that are not divided into cases. And we have unique metadata in each of these 800 libraries. In SharePoint, metadata are called columns. And this is the important part on top. This is the part that too few people understand, much to my consternation. We have 5 software products. There they are. But they don't do anything until you program them with content rules. This is how the automation has occurred. It takes place, I should say. So what you do with this record keeping software is you write content rules that say, for this content in SharePoint, assign this retention rule to it. So once you get those rules written, it has the effect of locking all 3 levels of the system together like Lego blocks, nice and tight, and you can't change it or shouldn't change it. So the days of SharePoint in the wild have to stop and stop now, because the rules up top contain references to the names of libraries and the names of columns to make these rules work. And if you change the names of the libraries or the columns, the rules break and your system is no longer compliant. Okay? So It's critical that you keep this system stable, predictable, and structured. That's what it takes to be compliant. If libraries are popping up every day, you'll never be able to govern that. So, on average, each category will have 3 content rules. So you have to write 2,400 content rules up here in this example, 2,400 of them, regardless of which software you purchase. Now, we're almost done learning what you need to learn to understand how to put a project together. But we're going to go deep on one of them, and that is the content rules that I just mentioned. I call it the beating heart of an EDRMS, because if you don't understand this and truly understand it, then you won't understand what parts you have to put together to make the project work. And this is a full 1/3 of your entire project. Okay, don't underestimate this. This is huge. So let's go. There are 3 components of an EDRMS. There's your retention schedule, which we have to restructure in software-ready format. Then we have your record software of choice, one of these 5. And of course, we have SharePoint. Those 3 products don't know that the other exists. You have to hammer them all together and make them work together. And what makes the blood flow around this body? Content rules. That's why I call it the beating heart of an EDRMS. So in order to understand content rules, we first had to understand retention rules. Retention rules are simpler than you think. They are rules that decide when a document will die or be transferred. There are 3 parts: a trigger, a retention period, and a disposition action. For example, when 5 years old, delete it. Or 10 years after the audit end date, transfer it to archives or delete it, right? So there's a trigger, of which there are time-based triggers and event-based triggers. There's a retention period, typically years, and then there's a disposition action, such as destroy it, keep it permanent, or transfer to somewhere else. Okay? On the left here, we have a fragment of a retention schedule with 15 business activities in here. Okay? Now, you'll notice that the retention rules are often repeated. This one here, keep 5 years and delete, is used in both activity 1, expense reimbursement, and activity 5, office supplies. Now, the way to understand retention rules versus content rules is to break down the retention rules into their unique mathematical permutations. What do I mean by that? It means that in a typical retention schedule, one rule, retention rule, is used across a lot of activities. So we had to get that out of there. So here, for those 15 activities, if we sort it by retention rule, we see that there's only 5 uniquely different retention rules for those 15 activities. 5 unique retention rules. Each retention rule, therefore, is just a mathematical permutation. So 5, keep 5 years and delete is one combination. Keep 10 years and delete is another one, and so on. Okay? So the number of activities does not equal the number of retention rules. The number of retention rules is much smaller than the number of business activities. Okay? Now, what is a content rule? Well, a content rule is a rule that says for this content in SharePoint, apply this retention rule to that content. Okay? So again, the retention rule is just a unique mathematical permutation. So there are 3 parts to a content rule: a name, a condition, and a retention rule. The name is just a unique name. The condition says what documents in SharePoint. And how do we say that? Well, a typical way is to say in this library with this metadata column that contains that value, these are the records I'm talking about. For those records, assign this retention rule to it. So these content rules work 24 hours a day. They never go to sleep. So these content rules are assigning retention rules to SharePoint content 24 hours a day, 12,000 times a day. So here's how the whole system comes together. And this is the slide that if you take away one thing today, please take this away. You have on the right maybe 50, maximum 100 uniquely different retention rules. They're all named and numbered, okay? They're just permutations. On the left, we have to write content rules that determine what to do with these retention rules. Retention rules are just sitting there. They're doing nothing for you at all. But the content rules apply the rules to the content, which makes the system work. Now, down below, you'll see there are 5 products here. Each one of those products has a different proprietary name for their particular proprietary content rules. In Purview, they're called auto-apply policies. In Gimmal, they're called life cycles. Doesn't matter. The principle is exactly the same in all 5 products. So let's go through an example here. Let's say we have a business activity in the retention schedule called audits. So of course you have that. Are they case records? Yes. Why? Because each audit is an adventure that comes to an end, and the records generated by that activity must be kept separate from all the other adventures. Each adventure is called a case, and each adventure has a uniquely different end date or event date. So audits are cases, projects are cases, contracts are cases. So let's go back to audits. We have 1,000 records in there. One of them is the final issued report, the outcome or output of that activity. And it has a high retention value. In this case, we're going to keep it for, let's say, audit end date plus 10 years before we destroy it. So how do we identify that one document in SharePoint? Here's how. You write a content rule condition that says library equals audits and metadata field or column final report contains yes. Therefore, it's going to be assigned this retention rule, audits final report, number 7, which is audit end plus 10 years and destroy. What about the other 999 documents left behind in that library? Well, they have lower retention value. They're just not as important. So let's get rid of them sooner. Okay, so we're going to write another content rule that says library audits and final report equals no. Now we're targeting the 999 others. The retention rule will apply as 5 and destroy, which is keep 5 years and destroy. Okay, so we call that digital debris, and it doesn't have as high a retention value. So here we have one library, 2 content rules, 2 different retention rules being applied to the content of that library. One retention rule is applied to a single document. The other 999 gets a different retention rule. All is good. Now we've got that library accounted for. Let's move on to projects. Well, we have a metadata column called document type, and it has 4 potential values: planning, technical, budgeting, or legal. Well, depending on which document type it is, we can have a different retention rule. For example, if the library is projects and document type equals planning, then use this retention rule, projects 5 destroy, which is end of project plus 5 years and destroy, and so on. So you can see here a pattern. We found that on average in a healthy EDRMS, you end up with an average of 3 content rules per library, okay, per category. So if you had, for 1,000 users, you would end up typically with about 800 libraries. So 3 content rules per library means 3 times 800, which is 2,400 content rules. So you would end up with 2,400 content rules and 50 to 100 retention rules maximum. If you're small, you could have as few as 20. But typically for 1,000 users, you'd have between 50 and 100. So where do these content rules come from? Well, they don't fall out of the sky. You have to write them. You have to write them. They don't come with any software. They're unique to your libraries and your situation and your retention schedule. So you have to cook up these 2,400 rules. And that's the part so few people understand about EDRMS. This is what your retention schedule will look like. Again, I highly recommend you view our YouTube video on how to create a modern software-ready retention schedule. But in yellow are your content rules. In purple are the retention rules that are called by these yellow content rules. So your retention schedule has to contain all the content rules. Now, as if that weren't enough, you have to build two sets of content rules. Yeah, this set is English, plain English. Anyone can read them, anyone can understand them, and they will never change because those are the rules you set for your organization. Fair enough. But now you went out and you bought a piece of software. Every one of those five products is different from the other. They all have different styles, approaches, and techniques and language for their content rules. So now you have to create the same 2,400 content rules, but this time in the proprietary language of the vendor you purchased, right? But please don't show them to anyone. They don't need to see them. The retention schedule has the English, plain English simplified version of those rules. Now you need to cook up 2,400 vendor specific rules. Okay? And do not show them to anyone. Now, in the case of Microsoft Purview, this is what your retention schedule would look like. And here's an example from Opus by AvePoint. This is one of the records products. Here are what the internal software specific proprietary content rules look like. Notice that there were so many columns or elements for one rule that I stacked them on top of each other. It would be too wide to go from left to right. So there's something like 36 of them here, right? So there's no reason for anybody to have to see these. Here's an example from Collabware. This is a tab right here called Content Rules, and you'll notice the pattern here. We have column, department, operator, equals, value, administration, right? That's the condition. And to that, you bolt a retention rule. Here's from an example from Gimmal. You see the same style here. You have a property, which is a metadata column, equals value, and then you assign retention rule to it. Here's an example from RecordPoint from Australia. They have it in the opposite direction. They go from right to left. Doesn't matter, but they have a condition which they call a pattern, and the retention rule they call an outcome. So the pattern could be library equals reporting and metadata field equals whatever. And then that drives an outcome, which is destroy 5 years after the creation date or what have you. So very different implementation technologies, but exactly the same principle. Nobody gets away without doing content rules. Here's what it looks like in Microsoft Purview. They call these content rules auto-apply policies. Now, in Purview, a retention rule, the right-hand side, is called a label. The label here is safety audits, 10 years, review, and delete. So how do you apply that label to what content? Well, here's how you do it down below. Refinable string 45 equals audits, and refinable string 0 equals reports. Now, what does that mean? Well, refinable string 45 equates to the library. Refinable string 00 equates to a column called document type. So this really means library equals audits and doc type equals reports. This is a tiny miniature, almost programming language called KeyQL. So vastly different approaches, but they all do exactly the same thing. Here's an example from Opus. In Opus, a retention rule is called a term. So in this form, they're saying apply term to any content that meets this criteria between the if and the then. So whatever criteria or conditions are met, then apply the following retention rule or term. So here you can see some of the conditions can be approved equals yes, approved by matches Smith, what have you. But you see the same pattern emerging, which is you have the condition that specifies the SharePoint content, then you apply a retention rule to that content. So here's where we come up with the number 2400. If you have 1,000 users, which is kind of my bell curve average, and 800 categories, which would be appropriate for an EDRMS, then that would mean you would be making 3 of these rules per category, which is 2,400. So you got to ask yourself this question, and this is a little bit frightening, but you need to know this. How long will it take me to create one of these content rules? So I have a rule of thumb here, which is a non-Purview product, give yourself 10 minutes per rule. A Purview product, well, there's only one. If it's Purview, give yourself 20 minutes per rule. Okay? Now, if you want to do the math, which I've done for you here, how long is it going to take you to create 2,400 rules? It would take you 50 days non-Purview, 100 days Purview. If you want to know how and why it takes that long, then I encourage you to watch my YouTube video about retention rules in Purview and a few other Purview videos, but you'll see what goes on in detail. So now finally, we can have a conversation about what does it take to deploy a modern EDRMS. Turns out that there are 6 steps. You cannot remove any of the 6 steps. 5 won't work, 7 won't work. There's 6 of them. You cannot change the order. There's strong interdependencies between these 6 steps. You can't do a step unless you complete the previous one. So here they are. Number 1, take your retention schedule and redesign it. Okay? You're not changing your retention rules, but you're restructuring the retention schedule. You're changing it into a spreadsheet. You're putting certain structure to it so that it can be read by your record software. Then you have to generate a machine readable version of it and that can be loaded into the record keeping software that you purchased, right? That means it's going to be machine readable and in a specific format. Now you're almost ready to do step 3, which is to load the retention schedule into your record keeping software. That's not a big job. This is a big job. Step 1, I've seen it take 3 years, okay? For a bunch of reasons. If you want to know the reasons and how to go about it, then look at the video I mentioned earlier on how to create a software-ready retention schedule. I've done one that's taken me 3 years. So once you've got it ready, you have to load it into your software, and that should take you half a day, no matter what size it is, no matter what product you purchase. Why? Because all you're loading into the software is not all the activities, but just the unique retention rules. So now you're halfway through your through your project, but it's not halfway. You're only just getting warmed up. Step 4 is none of these 5 software products will work without a appropriate SharePoint information architecture. What does that mean? That means in our little example here that we're going to have 800 libraries. We're going to have 800 content types. We're going to have an average in a healthy EDRMS of 14 columns per library. And no, that doesn't mean that the users have to create 14. It means the users are entering an average of 2.1. But at 14 columns per library, that means you have 11,200 column assignments in SharePoint. And you have lists in the term store and so on. How long will it take you to build and define that? Well, we do it every day. And it is in the form of a spreadsheet. It's a blueprint. It's a spreadsheet that says build these libraries, these content types, these metadata columns. Shut up, put up, just build it. Don't ask questions. This is what it takes for the software to work correctly. And it'll have event dates in it, all the stuff you need. This is another project that can take you 1 to 2 years. And I have done it, and it has taken me 1 to 2 years. Okay? It's not for the faint of heart. But somebody has to do it. And that somebody is you. So now you've got the spreadsheet at 8 New York, and you walk across the hall and you knock on the door of IT and you say, hey, IT, here's a SharePoint information architecture that I need you to build so that my software can do its job. It would be fun to see the reaction you get from that when you hand over a spreadsheet that says, with 11,200 rows in it. I've done that. It's an interesting reaction you get. How long will it take IT to actually construct that blueprint? Well, I don't really know, but it's going to be measured in months, not weeks, months. And they're going to make mistakes, and they had to be fixed. So months can sometimes turn into years if you're not careful, but I would think months. But you got to have it because SharePoint, the record keeping software can't work without that. So now you've done step 5. Everything is working. All the libraries are up and running. The cases have been created. The event dates are in there. Oh my gosh, a couple of years has gone by. You've got it all up and running. But you know what's missing? Your content rules, 2,400 of them. Record software can do nothing without them. So now you have to sit down and build them, 2,400 of them. Why can you not do it earlier? Because when you enter them into the software checks and makes sure that that library exists, that that column exists. So you cannot write the rules until after the SharePoint IA is done. Okay? Now, obviously, in a real world project, you're going to do this incrementally, department by department by department. What I'm describing is a whole organization, which is highly unlikely, but the steps don't change, right? It doesn't matter how many times you go through the six-step cycle, but you had to go through it. So the step 6 is the last thing you have to do, and it cannot be done until all 5 previous steps have been completed, okay? There's no way around this. This is what it takes to deploy an EDRMS, regardless of the record software you buy. Now, here at RimTech, what we've done is we've done this so many times, and it has taken so much work and effort that we came up with ways to automate it. So we now have automation for steps 5 and for step 6. We take those two right off the table. We also have shortened paths for the other steps. But trust me, to eliminate just step 5 alone is saving you up to a year. And step 6, eliminating that can save you up to another year. So we're talking shrinking projects from many years to many weeks with Catalyst, okay? Depending on what industry you're in. If you're in a municipal industry, we can almost bring it down to days. Other industries, weeks. But either way, you're avoiding years of effort. So now, if you look deep inside a project, this is another level of depth. That's a 6-step process is quite valid and very high level. This is more detailed. I see I'm starting with T3. I should be starting with T1. So there are 21 steps to any EDRMS. I'll just very quickly walk through them. Number one is you'll find that your retention schedule is short, coming up short on business activities. They all are, they all do. And you have to interview business units to come up with those missing activities. Then you have to do it again for permissions. Then you have to get your retention schedule, which most products call a file plan, imported into your record keeping software. So this very much follows the 6 steps. It's just more detailed. Then you have to finalize your retention rules and finalize your content rules. Now remember I said you can't do the content rules until after? Well, this is the English readable content rules, not the technical ones that are going into the software, right? Then you have to deploy your SharePoint IA, either by hand or with Catalyst, doesn't matter. Either way, you got to come up with that IA. And then you have to apply the business unit permissions that you defined in step T4. Again, these are all misnumbered here. Then you have to, now I'm assuming that most organizations these days are using Purview, not necessarily for records, but definitely for security, sensitivity, and data loss prevention. So assuming that's part of your project, then you would now define sensitivity labels. And then you apply those labels via auto apply rules, and then you deploy them in the actual live Purview software. Now, next step is in SharePoint, there's no global search. Not a good one anyway. So you want to build, design, deploy a global search, meaning a search that can go across multiple libraries and multiple columns. You have to test this thing, of course. Now, the next 3 steps I put in green because they're optional. If you're doing a migration, then there are 3 levels of migration: cleanup, lift and shift, and a true migration. That's another YouTube video. I don't think I've recorded that one yet, but it's coming up. So if we bypass migration, now we're talking about training. And there are 2 types of training. One is the IMA. That's an Information Management Administrator. That's for people who represent the records people in each department, and they do 6 predetermined duties to keep an EDRMS healthy. Of course, you have to train your end users, and then you're done. So that's the detail level of the 6 steps that you're going to go through in order to deploy any EDRMS. How long will it take? Well, it depends on the scale of the project. It depends on how good or bad shape your retention schedule is in. And it depends on if you're a municipality or not. If you're a municipality, you get a free pass. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. You're free. Get out of jail free card, essentially, is what I think I'm trying to say. But if you're a municipality, then we can whip through this in days. If you're not, then with Catalyst, we can just compress from years to months, possibly even weeks. And of course, if you're going to do a migration, that will consume time as well, right? So that is it. These are my conclusions. Number 1 is having the record-keeping software, Purview, Opus, Gimmal, Collabware, RecordPoint, doesn't matter what it is, isn't going to accomplish anything. It's what you do with the software that makes you compliant. You cannot just expect to take that software and start using it. It does not work like that. You're going to have to rejig your retention schedule. No question about that. Number 3, you'll need a prescribed information architecture. And yes, we have YouTube videos on how to do that. What is a suitable IA for an EDRMS project? And don't forget the content rules. They're the absolute key. No content rules, no compliance. And that requires a major investment. To do them by hand properly, for about 1,000 users would take you approximately 100 days if it's Purview, 50 days if you're not. So that's it. I'm done. And if you have any questions, feel free to either put them in the chat or speak up. I'm all ears, and I'll be around for another 15 minutes. Okay, no questions at this point, so I'll wrap it up. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to attend. I will send out an email to each of you tomorrow with a recording. Share it freely. Definitely would love to see you share this around. So again, thank you very much for participating, and hopefully we'll see you at the next session. Take care.